Today, I'm going to take you through everything you need to know for building muscle for Jiu-Jitsu. Firstly, do I believe that there are some differences when gaining mass for grappling athletes versus striking athletes? Yes. I think grappling athletes can get away with more volume and packing on more size because it's not going to detrimentally affect some of their sport. It might even help it. Now, there are some considerations to make before you go down this road of building muscle for Jiu-Jitsu. The first one is time. How much time do you have? The sessions you are going to Jiu-Jitsu and doing, are those the only times in the week you can train? That will dictate what you do outside of that and how much you do in the gym. The other thing is your Jiu-Jitsu training volume. If you're trying to build mass, you're probably going to have to back off a little bit of your training volume unless you're only doing 2 or 3 sessions a week anyway. The other one is your weight class if you're competing. So if you're competing, you're going to have to be aware that when you're adding muscle mass, are you looking to move up a weight class? Are you looking to fill out your weight class? These are things you need to track as you're building muscle. If you're not competing, obviously that doesn't matter. You're just trying to get in better shape for whatever reason that is. Maybe you're just trying to balance Jiu-Jitsu as your so-called cardio training, and then your weight training is there to help you build strength and muscle. So let's dive into the nitty-gritty details of building out a program for building muscle for Jiu-Jitsu, and starting with the number of sets you can perform per muscle group per week. Now, there's an interesting study that looked at training volume in terms of sets per muscle group per week, and they had groups that performed 5 sets, 5 to 9 sets, or 10 plus sets per week. And what they found was 10 plus sets per muscle group per week led to far greater gains in muscle mass than less sets. Now, this suggests that performing 10 or more sets is superior than performing less sets, and therefore more volume is likely better for building muscle. Now, there is a dose-response relationship between volume and muscle growth when we're talking about sets per muscle group per week. Now, it's important to understand that when we're talking about volume and sets, we're not talking your warm-up sets or sets that aren't done at a high relative effort. A high relative effort would be failure or close to failure, usually around 3 reps short of failure. And this also depends on the loads being used, but we'll get into that further down the line. Now, does that mean that we can just go infinite and do as many sets as we can in a week and we're going to see linear gains and growth because we're doing more sets? Well, interestingly, a gym and volume training study, if you're not familiar with gym and volume training, it's typically 10 by 10, far too much volume anyway, so don't do that. But they saw that 14 sets were not better than 9 sets for per muscle group per week in terms of muscle growth. Now, it's important to look at that study with a caveat, and that caveat is they did all these sets within one session. If you've ever trained a muscle group and you've done 14 sets close to failure or to failure in one session, you know that by the second half of that session, you're not going to be able to do very much. So what becomes important when we're talking total weekly training volume is how that is split throughout the week, not just in one session. Now, when we're talking general recommendations for number of sets per week, we're looking at little bands. Brad Schoenfeld, he is the hypertrophy, expert within the space. He has bands. You can go anywhere from 10 to 15, then you can progress to 15 to 20. Then when you're getting over 20 sets per muscle group per week, that's when you're starting to overreach, and you don't want to spend too much time above that before coming back down. Now, if you are time crunched, you can make gains with as little as 4 sets per week per muscle group as well. So it's all about the relative effort you're giving. So when we dive into training frequency, this will all make a bit more sense. When we're talking reps, it's often taught that there are rep ranges for certain qualities. So you might do 1 to 5 reps because you're targeting strength. You might do 8 to 12 reps as the hypertrophy zone, or you might do over 12 reps to 20 reps and you're looking at the endurance zone. I'm pretty sure it's still taught like this. However, that is not true. We have seen over and over within the literature that you can actually build muscle regardless of the rep range. All that matters is total volume being matched. A good example is this study here, where they looked at 7 sets of 3 at 3 RM versus 3 sets of 10 at 10 RM. And what they found were similar increases in muscle mass. However, the 7 by 3 group started to see joint pain and things like that. So the message is here, you can build muscle mass on low reps, you can build muscle mass on higher reps. However, one's going to take a harder toll on your body. I recommend sticking with a 6 to 20 rep range if you're trying to build muscle for Jiu-Jitsu, but that does not mean you cannot do lower reps. Once we get into some of the training splits, you can still target some of that strength. You might start with a compound lift in the beginning in the 1 to 5 rep range, and then move on to your hypertrophy training in your 6 to 20 rep range for your other exercises. There's no hard and fast rule where you have to stick within these ranges. There's also research to suggest that using a variety of rep ranges leads to more muscle growth than just sticking with, for example, just 8 to 12. If you look at any of the old bodybuilding magazines and some of the old pro routines in there where it's 7 to 10 exercises or 8 to 12 reps, you don't need to do that. It's much better to start with your lower reps within the session. So you might do, for example, bench press for 1 to 5 reps as your strength exercise, and then you're going to move on to dumbbell bench for 8 to 10 reps, and then you might do chest flies as an example for 12 to 15 reps, and you might finish with triceps, this kind of stuff. So you're kind of moving down that rep ladder and you're getting touch points within each rep range. We can't talk about reps without talking about load. Load and reps have that inverse relationship, right? Because we're doing high reps, we typically haven't used low load because you cannot rep your 1 rep max for more than 1 rep. Vice versa, if you're doing low reps, typically the loads are going to be heavier. Otherwise, you're not going to get near or close to failure or a high relative effort. So the general rule is if you're going higher rep with lighter loads for hypertrophy specifically, you need to hit failure or close to failure. And you're not going to do these higher reps with your big compound lifts typically. So if you're doing 15 to 20 reps, you're probably not going to do that on a squat. So there's no safety issue. You're probably going to do it on something like a biceps curl, triceps extension, calves, whatever, smaller muscle groups where you can hit failure. You're not going to have a problem recovering, and you're going to get that muscle building stimulus through lighter loads. Now, if you're using heavier compound exercises, you don't actually need to go to failure to maximize muscle growth. You can stay 2 to 3 reps shy of failure and get similar stimulus as you would if you were training with lighter loads going to failure. So you need to understand that if you're training big compound lifts, don't go to failure. Failure is going to cause you more harm than good because of the fatigue you're going to carry over to everything else. So use those lifts 2 to 3 reps short of failure, and then use your single joint isolation exercises for higher reps where you can go to failure or very close to it. Then we go on to the topic of how often you should train in a week to build muscle for Jiu-Jitsu. Now, training frequency is a funny one. It's been purported as the more you train, the more muscle you build. However, when you go into the depths of that research, it's usually the group that trains more does more volume. So it's actually the volume that is improving or building more muscle instead of how often you train. So training more often does not equal more muscle growth. Now, when you dive into the research where they match volume between a group that trains less in a week for a group that trains more often, then we see similar gains of muscle. Now, there's a couple of important things to know around training frequency. One, training frequency can be used as a way to increase volume. Obviously, the more you train, the more chances you have to train a muscle group. So training frequency is an option to increase training volume throughout your training cycle. You might start with 2-3 times a week of training. If you have the time, further down the line in your next cycle, you might bump that up to 4 times a week. And that's going to help you increase your training volume. Another thing to consider is if you're only training once a week, there's only so much you can do in one session, or even twice a week. There's only so much volume you can do before fatigue sets in. We know that exercises that you perform last in your session suffer the most in terms of strength and hypertrophy in the long run. Therefore, we may want to keep things a little fresher and you train a little more often so you can get more out of each set. Think about how much load you may have to reduce on an exercise if it was your 6th or 7th exercise, or maybe your 10th set in that session for that muscle group, versus doing 5 sets in that session and coming back a few days later and doing another 5. Which one will you be able to handle more load and therefore create more tension in the muscle to stimulate more muscle growth? It would be the one where you do 5 sets and 5 sets. So there's things to consider within this, but obviously there are constraints around your time, you can get to the gym that often, etc., etc. Now, the training frequency as well, that'll be dictated by the training splits you use. And we'll go into some training splits now of what I deem to be beneficial, especially for Jiu-Jitsu. So this is an example of a 3-day full body routine that you could use. I've just given a general outline. I haven't put sets and reps or anything like that in there. But it's just to show you how you could set something like this out without overthinking and trying to do too much. Now, the idea here is that you're starting with a heavier movement. This could be in your 1 to 5 rep range. And this is just to maintain or develop strength during this. So your heavy lower body movement, it could be a squat, it could be a deadlift, whatever you choose. Then you go into your moderate upper body and moderate upper body push or pull exercise. So it could be anything from bench presses, dumbbell benches, whatever, chin-ups, things like that. Your single leg lower body exercise could be split squats, it could be single leg RDLs, hip thrusts, whatever. And then a couple of isolation movements, arms, shoulders, whatever that is. Day 2, you're going to start with an upper body stuff, so heavy upper body push and pull. So it could be a heavy bench, it could be a heavy chin up, a moderately loaded lower body exercise, so it could be something like leg press, some kind of leg machine. If you don't have machines, it just could be a moderately loaded squat. And then just some accessories, upper accessories and lower accessories. So that, again, this could be your single leg lower body exercises or machine curls even. And then upper body accessory could be dumbbell style movements, dumbbell benches, dumbbell rows, all that stuff. Then the final day here is more of an accessory day, lower body accessory 1. Again, that could be some kind of single leg movement. It could be some kind of machine movement. Same with the upper bodies, more dumbbell style movements or machines, and then isolations, arms, shoulders, and things like that. Now within this, you're going to play around with the volume. Obviously, you don't want to do too much where you're so fatigued going into training the next day. However, you will incur some fatigue and your jiu-jitsu will potentially take somewhat of a hit, but that is fine because the goal is to build muscle, not so much to improve or to spend more time on the mats. So while we're here, I'm just going to fill in some basic set reps for one of the days. So for example, the heavy lower, you might do 3 sets of 3 here. Just to keep it simple, you might even do 2 sets of 4. You don't have to have so much volume. Moderate upper push and pull, you might do 3 to 4 sets. And then you're looking up anywhere from 6 to 10 reps. You might even go 8 to 10 reps depending on what you're doing there. Same thing with the pull, anything from 3 to 4 reps, or sets for 8 to 10 reps. Your single leg lower body exercise, again, you're looking at around 3 to 4 sets. Doing slightly higher reps as well, you're looking anywhere from 8 to 12. And then your isolation movements, these aren't as fatiguing, so you can do a little more volume. Again, you can do anywhere from 2 to 4 sets, and you're looking at anywhere, depending on what you're doing, 10 to 20 reps. And that would essentially be a day here. Same thing with the upper push and pull. You might only do 3 sets of 4, or even 2 sets of 5, or you might even do 3 sets of 3 again. Your moderate lower body exercise, this is a little more fatiguing, so it might be 3 sets of 8 to 12 in here, and then your upper accessories, same thing. 3 to 4 sets, you're looking at, depending on what you're doing, 10 to 15, and then same thing with your lower, 2 to 3 sets, 10 to 15 reps. And then you can go on to the final one there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you as well a 4-day split. I don't believe you should be doing anything more than 4 days if you're trying to build mass for jiu-jitsu, especially if you're still training jiu-jitsu. I think you're just doing too much and it doesn't serve much purpose. Outside of doing a 3 or 4 day split, if you're looking at doing 5 or 6 day, you're looking at more body part style bro splits or modified upper lower splits, or you're looking at push-pull legs. And I would not recommend doing something like push-pull legs because that's 6 days a week of training, and that is far too much to handle and too time consuming when you're trying to also be on the mat. So here's the example of a 4-day upper lower split. You'll see here there's only a few exercises on the lower body days on day 1 and 3. If we actually look at some of the demands of jiu-jitsu, the lower body strength doesn't seem to have that much of an impact or differentiate elite and sub-elite jiu-jitsu players. However, it's important to still have lower body strength, even some size, so we have that in here. We have a little more volume on the upper body days in terms of number of exercises. Now, when you do this, you would do this day 1 and 2, one after the other, rest, day 3, then day 4. So typically it would be like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday as an example. You could also do this over the weekend. There is no hard and fast rule again. So day 1, we've got a squat. That might be your heavier loaded exercise. So that might be simply your 3 sets of 5 or something in the 1 to 5 rep range. You might even do 5 sets of 2, 5 sets of 3 as an example. Leg press, you're going to do for higher reps. You're looking at anywhere from 10 to 12. And then your single leg Romanian deadlift, you're probably going to do is a similar rep range, 10 to 12. On day 2, we're looking at doing the bench press. Again, that's maybe our heavier lift. It might be 3 sets of 4, just as an example. Then we're going to row. There are a ton of row variations depending on your lower back or what you're used to. You can do chest supported variations. You can do barbell rows. You could do machine style rows. Again, for this one, we're going to go a little heavier. We're looking at maybe, with the row, you typically don't want to go below 6 reps in my experience. What I found is when you're rowing, the lowest number of reps you go is around 6 to really get a good contraction with the back as well. So anywhere from 6 to 8 reps as a lower rep option there. Again, 3 to 4 sets. Then we've got the incline dumbbell bench. Again, some more pressing. Same thing here. We might do 8 to 12 reps for this one. Same with the pull down. I like to do a little higher reps here. You might go 10 to 15. And then you're going to finish with arms with whatever you want to do there. It might be 3 or 4 sets of biceps and triceps. As we move to day 3, You choose a deadlift variation. It doesn't have to be the deadlift. You don't have to deadlift. You don't have to use the back squat and the deadlift like you're a powerlifter. You can choose different variations. Even with the squat here, you might do a different squat variation. Deadlift here, I prefer to use the Romanian deadlift, but you can use a trap bar deadlift, whatever you want here. Same thing. You might do 3 sets of 3 as some of your strength stuff. Then the hip thrust, you might do higher reps. That might be 8 to 12 again. Here, you might even do, if you're going to do conventional deadlift, then you might even do Romanian deadlift here instead of hip thrust. These are just things you can do here. Then you can finish with lunges. These can be very high reps. These can be 20 plus reps if you're looking to build some mass down there. And then finally, we're looking at day 4, weighted chin-ups. Something like 4 sets of 6. That's one of my favorite set rep schemes for weighted chin-ups. Overhead press. So many options you can do here. One of my favorites is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 as an example. Then you're going to row again, but we did rows here for 6 to 8 reps, so we're probably going to go higher rep. So anywhere from 10 to 15 reps here. Then we might do some weighted push-ups. You can even do dumbbell bench. There's a lot of different options here. Same thing, 10 to 15 reps, and then arms. Again, we do 10 to 15. We might do 10 to 15 here. We might do high reps, 15 to 20 here, or we might do some lower reps and high reps, lower reps and high reps. You have options within that. Now, as I mentioned, I don't recommend doing more training days than this. I think it becomes too much. It doesn't serve much purpose as you can get adequate volume doing a 3 or 4 day split while still training jiu-jitsu. Now, there's one component I haven't touched on in here, and that is your dietary requirements. So let's go down that rabbit hole quickly before we finish this video. This is the super simple way to break down your diet for building mass. Now, forget some of the bullshit Gracie diets, intermittent fasting, all that crap out there. None of that shit is going to help you build mass, and it's not going to be effective for your jiu-jitsu. Do not cut out your carbs. You're building mass. You need your carbohydrates in your diet. It's going to help fuel your sessions, and it's going to make it a lot easier to get the food down. Now, a simple way to start to know where you need to be regarding eating calorie-wise for gaining mass, a simple way to estimate it is you take 1.6 times your body weight in pounds. That will give you an estimated calorie number for you to gain mass. Now, another way you can do it is you can track your calories for 7 days, and you can take that average, and if your weight isn't moving up or down, then that will be your maintenance calories. You bump that up 200, 300 calories, and you're good. But what's just as important as the number of calories you're consuming is the breakdown of the macronutrients within your diet. A lot of people make the mistake of not eating enough protein, and when you're not eating enough protein, you don't maximize the muscle building response that you're trying to achieve. Now, some people eat too much protein, thinking more protein is always better. However, that's not true. We know that from the research. We know that 0.8 per pound of grams of protein per pound of body weight is kind of that maximum ceiling in terms of our muscle building response. However, you can go to 1 gram per pound of body weight of protein, no adverse effects. Sometimes it's just easier to track that way because you know, hey, I'm 160 pounds, I need 160 grams of protein. While that won't give you any extra benefits over 0.8, it can just be easier. Sometimes just an easier rule to follow. And if you really like to eat meat and protein, then you get a little bit of extra in there to help you throughout the day. Now, the problem is people going over this 1 gram and well exceeding it. You'll see a lot of bodybuilders and fitness people on YouTube, and they're eating 350 grams of protein, but they weigh 200 something pounds. It doesn't make any sense to eat that much protein when you're trying to build mass. The whole idea of protein is, okay, you want to support the muscle growth, but you want to leave enough room for fat and specifically carbohydrates so you can fuel your sessions. The more protein you take, the less of the other two you can eat to stay within your calorie budget. And that means less energy availability for your training if you have reduced carbohydrate or reduced fat intake. So stick with this 0.8 to 1 gram per pound. Next is your fat. I like to set mine at around 25% of my total calories. So once you work your calories out, say 25%, and that will be your total fat intake. Again, just a quick rundown. Protein is 4 calories per gram. Fat is 9 calories per gram. Carbs is 4 calories per gram. So if I take 25% of my total calories, then I divide that by 9, that'll give me the grams of fat I need per day. So I like to say mine at 25. You can go up to even 30% if you're like a slightly higher fat diet. I do not recommend doing a high fat diet and low carbohydrate, especially when building muscle mass. There's some great research that just came out recently showing having carbohydrates in your diet is better for the muscle building response. and then the carbs make up the rest. And you might be surprised at how high the carbohydrate number is, especially if you're at heavier body weights. You're looking at maybe 300 plus grams of carbohydrates in a day. So this is just a simple framework you can use to create your diet. Now, if you enjoyed this video, in the description, I've actually got a Jacked Grapplers training program. It's 17 weeks hypertrophy program for grappling. It's in the Three Tons of Fighting Underground, but you get access to all the programs in there for that one membership price, including that program. So if you go down there, you can join. You also get access to the online courses, the private community, being live on the podcast for the Q&As, and it's all under one subscription with all the coaches in the private community. So check that out, but also like, subscribe. If you like this, please comment as well, help the algorithm. If there's anything else you want me to cover, please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you next time.